In with them just as, oh, but there we go. All right.
That is an exotic dancer, stripper, whatever you want to call it. Her business involves bodily contact with lots of men who are strangers to her, and it would be surprising probably if there was not DNA from men on her clothing. Just as in Dr. Meehan's example, it would be surprising if a kindergarten teacher didn't have DNA from her students.
So I'm getting confused. Is the unidentified male DNA that was found on Miss Mangum, are you now saying that's not potentially exculpatory?
No, sir. I'm saying that the difference between exculpatory and potentially exculpatory is that something that is clearly exculpatory would be something like there's no DNA from Duke lacrosse players there. That is exculpatory. It doesn't prove they didn't commit the crime, but it is exculpatory because it shows that there is no evidence that they did. However, the presence of other DNA in and of itself would not be exculpatory. As a matter of fact, I mean, you could even question how it would be used at trial. If you wanted, I suppose that you could use it to impeach the testimony of the victim or something if she denied having sexual contact or having any kind of contact with other men or something like that. But you can't tell how a piece of evidence can be used in an exculpatory fashion without seeing how it's fit into other things. I'm saying that there are probably lots of ways that you could use that evidence in an exculpatory fashion, but none of them are immediately apparent from the existence of the evidence.
Well, that type of evidence is certainly potentially exculpatory. Wouldn't you agree?
I thought that I had agreed with that. Potentially
and did you recognize it at the time you met with Dr. Meehan as potentially exculpatory?
I said that I did not recognize it as specifically exculpatory.
You said it was non-inculpatory.
Non-inculpatory. In other words, I didn't think it proved anything at all about this case in light of the profession of the victim and also in light of the fact that no determination, no conclusions could be drawn about where the evidence came from, how long it had been there, or anything like that.
Well,
hold on a second. Putting aside any semantic distinctions between exculpatory, potentially exculpatory, non-inculpatory, non-exculpatory, didn't you recognize the first time you heard that? Because it was something that he found that the FBI didn't find, that you were specifically looking for DNA. Didn't a light bulb go off in your head like, whoa, what is that?
No, sir. I wouldn't say that happened. I certainly specifically recognized that it was information to which they were entitled for the reasons you said.
Well, go ahead.
Because he found it in his testing, and they were entitled to all the results of the testing. And so there's no question that they were entitled to have it, whether you count it as exculpatory or not. But in light of the fact that when we talked about, the fact that how DNA is transferred, how the fact that no determination can be about how long it had been there or anything like that, the best sample that he estimated was at least 3 days old. So did I view this as having any involvement whatsoever in this case? I can't say that I did. Clearly it was something that they were entitled to have, but its probative value in this case, never struck me as having any significance whatsoever.
Putting aside whether it was discoverable or not, now you just said it didn't hit you as having probative value in the case. That's right? That was
yes,
your reaction?
Sir. I didn't think it proved anything at all about the facts and circumstances of what occurred on March 13th and 14th, that evening.
But again, putting aside discoverability, that was something that you, as far as developing the case, didn't feel like it was important to follow up on to find out who were these unidentified males, how did that DNA get there, how is that going to affect my case, how am I going to be able to prove my case in court knowing at some time the existence of unidentified males' DNA on articles of intimate clothing and so forth is going to be known. Didn't you feel like that was something that you needed to follow up on just as a matter of preparation for trial and your trial strategy and being convinced that indeed there had been a crime committed? Didn't you feel like you had to follow up on that?
Yes, sir, and we did. We went out and got a sample from the boyfriend. There were other samples that were identified. Anybody that we thought might have had any contact, we submitted those samples. But the actual significance of it, I'm not saying that we didn't try to figure out whose it was or anything like that. I'm just saying that it wasn't something that was so prevalent in my mind about an issue that I had to deal with that I thought about it much after the initial thing. We knew that there were other things to come in. I just didn't really think about it anymore at that time.
Well, going back to your mindset at that time, and I think you said this in your response to the bar, you were looking for evidence that supported the inference that there was a crime and that one or more members of the lacrosse team committed it, right?
Well, actually,
that's what you were looking for.
My specific intent when we sent the stuff over was to find out if they could resolve the mixtures on some of the evidence, including the fingernails. So that was my most pressing concern, because that is specifically the reason that Mr. Budzinski told me that YSTR analysis could exist in this case. At the same time, we had the DSI lab repeat the testing of the rape kit items on which we knew that there was no sperm or semen, so we knew there had not been an ejaculation in the time frame of this event, to see if there were other things that, other DNA from males that could be identified. And it's kind of like fingerprints in the sense that if there had been DNA from a lacrosse player there, then the presumption would be that there was only one time that DNA could have been left, because she did not go to that house and dance for those players all the time. So it's the same kind of thing as if you find, my fingerprints are going to be in this courtroom after this week. Before this week, my fingerprints couldn't have been in this courtroom because I'd never been here. The fact that you find my fingerprint in this courtroom isn't of any particular significance unless you can connect it to a time when I would have been here to do it. So with respect to the lacrosse players, their DNA, if there was no assault, they should have had no DNA on any of the clothing or items in the rape kit of the victim in this case. And in fact, they did not.
Right.
So, but the reason that it was being tested was to determine whether there was any such evidence, because that would be probative or at least suggestive of potential guilt. There was no such evidence. The fact that she had male DNA on her, on the other hand, was not suggestive that somebody else had committed this crime or suggestive that the crime hadn't taken place. It was simply a fact that was there, and a fact that should have been reported.
I think you told me more than I asked.
I'm sorry.
But maybe didn't tell me what I asked, which is your mindset. Is it fair to say you were looking for evidence that linked the players to the rape and weren't looking for evidence that broke the link?
I don't think that's necessarily true. The perfect result in this case would have been to find fresh sperm or fresh semen, whether or not that was identified with any lacrosse player or even not identified, because that would show that there had been sexual contact. If there were no lacrosse players or no person that we could identify associated with that, then that would have meant there would have been no charges. That would have been a specifically exculpatory event that would have prevented any charges from having been brought, because it would have shown that there was some kind of sexual contact, but that none of these people that we were looking at were involved. So that, had there been such evidence, that would have been good news, because it would have resolved the case. The problem is that the evidence that you're asking about was not evidence in my mind that resolved the case. It was It was nothing that got us to that. So it wasn't about it being exculpatory or inculpatory.
Well,